I mean, what do people trust today? I mean, I feel like we live in such a
They trust
cynical
their
age.
friends on Facebook, and I think if you look at the Pew Research, right? And if you look at the Pew Research, which I think is significant, is that most millennials anyway, so younger people, are getting their news from Facebook. And we know that Facebook is a stew right now of factual journalism and non-factual journalism. And you have to be pretty sophisticated to distinguish between the two.
I can't say the number of times I'll say to somebody, well, where did you read that? Facebook.
Facebook,
well,
right.
Where did that come from? On Facebook. How did it get there? I don't know. It was just Facebook.
My friend
right?
sent it to me, and it's really interesting. And it's not
did it
true.
come from a source? Was it it's just an amorphous piece, yeah.
Good evening. I'm so thrilled to see so many people here for this program tonight. I'm Kate Zachary. I'm the news director here at WGBH News, and I'd like to welcome you all to WGBH. I always enjoy welcoming people to our building because it's great to have the chance to introduce you to the spaces in which so many extraordinary programs are produced and broadcast. For those who are new to WGBH and perhaps don't know a lot about us, I'm very proud to let you know we are the largest public media outlet in New England. On both radio and television, we reach more New Englanders than any other public media outlet. GBH is responsible for more than 60% of everything Americans watch on public television. Think about that, 60%. From children's programs, Nova, Frontline, Antiques Roadshow, American Experience, Masterpiece, and so much more. We also operate 2 local television channels here in Boston, channels 2 and 44, with more than 2 million viewers every month. We're a major contributor to public radio, with 3 national programs that air on more than 400 stations across the country. And locally, we have 3 radio stations, 2 here in Boston and 1 on Cape Cod. They reach 750,000 listeners every week. Nationally, that's 4 million listeners. Public media is so essential these days, with fewer and fewer media outlets interested in serious journalism and fake news dominating so much of our conversations and clogging our social media feeds. Serious journalism is difficult to do. It's expensive, and it requires both nurturing and exposure. And few organizations can do it alone. So strategic partnerships have become crucial, and that's why 3 years ago, WGBH partnered with the New England Center for Investigative Reporting. Today, NECIR is based at WGBH News and works in collaboration with our reporters and editors to provide the type of investigative reporting that fewer and fewer organizations can practice. So again, welcome. And now it's my privilege to introduce Burt, the Executive Director of the New England Center for Investigative Reporting, to come up and introduce tonight's program. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. And thank all of you for joining us here tonight at WGBH Studios for investigative reporting and post-fact politics. Have a seat. Before I turn to our panel, a plug. Many of you saw little cards coming in, and there'll be more out in the reception. I invite you to use them to sign up for our biweekly email newsletter, The Eye. We track all the investigative reporting that comes out around the region and lets you know about it, and keeps you up to date about our own original investigations for WGBH, the Boston Globe, and other news outlets. Also, I want to remind everybody, if you didn't pick it up, that we're recording tonight's presentation, so behave yourselves. So I'd like to invite our panel up now. Come on up. Watch the steps. Right here. Great.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, guys.
To my left is Amy Walter. She's the national editor of the Cook Political Report in Washington, D.C. You may have also seen her, since you're all GBH fans, I hope, on PBS NewsHour, where she's a regular on the Politics Monday segment. It's a fan club. I know. In the middle here is Raney Aronson. She is the executive producer, which means she's in charge of PBS Frontline, which is the investigative TV show, and produced here. So we're glad to have Raney. Finally, we have Scott Allen, who's project editor at the Boston Globe, which means he's the director of the Spotlight investigative unit at the Globe and in charge of investigations there, and we're grateful to have Scott with us. Thank you, Scott. So let me start with a little intro, since our theme is post-fact politics. And I think I read this in a column, that the Oxford Dictionary's word of the year last year was post-truth, which they defined as an adjective as relating to or denoting circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. So it seems like that's a good addition to the official dictionary, whether you like post-truth or not. Such circumstances do seem to me a threat to people who make their living in facts, which hopefully it's all of us up here on the stage, as well as scientists and other people that are trying to stay grounded. Certainly, though, post-truth is changing our politics, and that's what I'd like to focus on tonight, the intersection of that and journalism. So to that point, I'd like to direct my first question to Raney, which is the hardest question of the evening.
Oh, great. Why not Amy?
Tough.
Come on.
Because you're an
She's
executive
the
producer.
analyst.
Yeah, the executive.
Executive
All right. Here we
producers
go.
know these things.
I'm ready, Burt.
So I was a little bit puzzled by that definition, actually.
Yeah, that's
Should
interesting.
we be talking more about facts rather than truth? And as a journalist, how do you differentiate the two?
Well, I think really truth is in the eye of the beholder, so I'm always slightly annoyed when I hear post-truth, because if you listen to people and what they think their truth is, it's really hard to argue. But if you talk about facts, right, what do we know and what's the proof of those facts, I think we're on very steady ground. So at Frontline, I mean, we definitely take on subjects and we look at it from every single angle, right? And we have this whole big effort that we fact check, and anytime we make an assertion, we absolutely make sure that we have pinned it down. And so we make sure that we have the backup, and we vet, and our vetting is extreme, and some people go crazy during our vetting. But at the end of the day, as you know, anyone who's been a reporter, at the end of the day, they really appreciate the process of being edited and vetted. However, I think in the world right now, there's been this big merging between this idea of truth or fact. And I think if we, in journalism, stick to the facts, right? And I mean this really diligently, and do our homework and work harder than ever to get it right, then we will again gain the upper hand. I'm really optimistic about this. I do not feel distressed by this. I feel super focused. And the other big thing for Frontline, and I know the NewsHour is doing this too, and you may be as well, is we've also said, well, there is clearly an inherent lack of trust right now, right? And that's a really big problem. So what can we do at Frontline to help people understand our process better, so that then, therefore, if they question our assertions, they can go in and actually vet our own material. So we've decided to really start a new project called our Transparency Project, in which we actually open up our notebooks and we show you, here's how we made these decisions, and get into a dialogue with the people who are coming to us, with the hope that those people who come to us who distrust us can go and check us, and then they can get in touch with us, and believe me, they do. And it becomes quite a righteous dialogue around our facts rather than what you believe or what you believe is your truth. So yes, long-winded answer.
First Amy, and then Scott. Yeah.
I love that distinction, because I think in politics, this is where we get into terrible, not terrible, but we get into tricky territory, because I think where people are giving facts and then they're also telling people how to interpret those facts, as opposed to understanding that everybody lives those truths differently, okay? So there was a story today, for example, in the Washington Post about he's a fisher person, I don't know what his official title is, waterman, fisherman, small island off the Chesapeake Bay, and he was a big Trump supporter. And he says, you know, this idea about climate change, even though the story in the Washington Post was about how this island has been losing ground, right? Every year, more and more of this island goes away. And he said, I don't think this is about climate change. This is not, I've lived here forever. This is my lived experiences. It's about what's happening with the Chesapeake Bay coming up over, we need to build a wall to protect it. So my experience is, why are we having this whole debate about climate change and whether that's factual or not? I want to tell you what my lived experience here is. What I'm seeing every day is the Chesapeake Bay coming up over, taking away this land. The answer to it should be to build a wall. But what Washington says is we need to have a debate about whether climate change is fact or fiction, whether you believe it or not. And I think it's very, it's disempowering for people because it feels like they aren't able to tell you that my experience with this is this. Instead, that is, I think that's undermined in many ways by the way we present what should be a very strong factual basis for some of these issues, whether it's healthcare or climate or guns, but we're taking out the lived piece of it. And that's where people exist. They don't exist in facts. They don't exist in policy sheets. They exist in their own unique life experiences.
Scott, do you have something?
Very interesting comment. I may sound old-fashioned, but on the Spotlight team, we actually do say, when we're trying to decide what we investigate, that we are looking to write something that is deeply true. I mean, I understand that's a loaded term these days, and I think it is true that truth is to some degree in the eye of the beholder, but I am going to go out on the limb a little bit and just say objective reality does exist. And
Hold on a second. No.
And truth is something that you have to fight for. It's not always given to you. Here's the stone tablets and here's the truth, and if you just write that, you'll be all set. Very often, you know, as journalists, all of us, I'm sure you guys have had the same experience of, you know, as you're trying to do the story, there are a lot of people pushing back at you saying that everything you think is wrong. And a lot of times they're very smart people that know a lot more about their business than you do, but you've got to sort of have that deep belief in yourself that you're gonna work through, you're gonna fight to get to things that are true, that are demonstrably true. What that has actually translated to for us and our investigative reports is not exactly a transparency project, but the way we write projects today has actually changed a little bit. They've grown a little bit longer because we actually are more explicit about what we've done and how we came to think what we think. So we actually had a story a couple of years ago about surgeons that do 2 surgeries at the same time. And the story was 8,000 words long. And like when we finished it, there it was. Here's our attempt at truth on this subject. It was an appallingly long story for so it was probably about twice the length that we felt like we really should do. But we felt like that's the story we had to tell. And so we told it, and we trusted the readers to come to it. And that story was the single longest read story in the Boston Globe the whole year. So I'm sure a lot of people didn't go that far into it, but we presented the facts diligently and thoroughly and transparently, and we let people decide for themselves. And I like to think that the way things have played out in the 2 years since, that the deep truth of what we were talking about has kind of been revealed. I mean, I agree that there's subjective edges, and in a complex society, the truth is not immediately available, but we have to just keep doing the work. And I guess I agree with them on that completely. We have to keep our heads down and keep doing what we do to expose the truth.
So just, this is to you, Scott, going down to the particulars of the dirty work of fact-checking. One of the other factors that's affected newsrooms, most newsrooms, are tighter budgets and smaller staffs. So just look not just at the Globe. I'd be interested to hear what is happening at the Globe, but also more broadly as a peer in the industry. Has that smaller newsrooms, tighter budgets, a changing business model affected fact-checking just through sheer numbers?
Yes, I mean, it's had an enormous effect. I mean, certainly a lot of media organizations outside of Washington are far less ambitious. They just have scaled back what they even try to do because they can't support it. Mm-hmm. And as we've gone from, I have to admit, I really liked the old print model where there's a 6 p.m. deadline and it was very orderly, and you you're getting ready for tomorrow's newspaper, and at the end of the day, you walk out past the printing press and you see the press rolling with your story heading out to the trucks. It was like very elegant, I thought. So we've sort of gotten over that the internet wrecked everything. But the internet did put us on a 24-hour cycle. We've had to change all of our staffing patterns. We've had to spread people across 24 hours. We have to move things a lot faster. And this is not just us, this is everybody in the business. If you go to any of the media websites, they're all posting major stories at any hour of the day. It could happen at any hour of the day. That never used to happen, but it does now. But what does that mean for fact-checking, which is the question? It means a lot of times you don't have the time for it. And when you get the information, you're pushing it out to the world as quickly as you can and getting it out there. And you're doing it, as Burt said, a lot of times in news organizations that have been impoverished and reduced in numbers. And the old-fashioned copy desk, which every major media organization had, that's kind of withered away. These were the people that they would get the stories after the reporters and the editors were all done, and they would review it and just check all the facts in it. Those people they're largely gone. I mean, I can show you where their desks used to be. It's like it's a big game of cornhole that they put on the floor, so it wouldn't look so vacant. But at the same time, we as the individual journalists, we have access to so much more information than we ever did. I mean, the way journalism is practiced today is much different than, if you go back, if you read the early coverage by Woodward and Bernstein about Watergate, it was they're brilliant. I don't want to take anything away from what they achieved, but what they were working with, it was very hard what they were doing, and it was a very narrow source base that they were using. Today, like so often, email creates an incredible electronic trail behind it. So you're able to get these troves of information where you can actually see what people thought because that's what they wrote and sent to their friend. Our ability to access information is so much greater, and in the same way, our ability to access big data and do our own data analysis so that we know our point is right because we check the data ourselves. We can do a much better job even in a time when there is reduced fact-checking, even in a time when we have to go very fast. Like one thing to watch for yourselves as consumers of the news, you'll see very often a story posted on a website, and a few minutes later, it'll say this story has been updated. Now, we've entered a new world. Now, the world we used to live in was a world of people called ombudsmen who would take complaints from the readers and write thoughtful commentary about, what was right and what was wrong with the journalism. Those guys have all, by and large, just disappeared. And we also used to have a place, and everybody had this, a place on page 2 or page 3 of the newspaper where corrections, and you could go to that page the next day and read the list of things that we did wrong the day before, at least the ones that we were prepared to admit. But now, in the live world of the digital, all we do is put, the story has been updated. So you may not always know, like, wait a minute, the earlier version I read before said Mississippi, now it says Montana, but they don't make any comment about why it's changed. So we've gone into a somewhat fluid age that we're all sort of getting used to of like, wow, this is really powerful. You can write as long as you want, you'll never fill the space. You just write, this has been updated when you change the story, and you can publish it any minute of any time, right from your own desktop. Boom, press send and send it out to the world. So it's an awesome power that's really in the hands of journalists today, and sometimes we don't live up to the promise and the opportunity that we have, but I feel like if I look at the very best work done today, like what the Post and the Times are doing right now about Washington, D.C. and Washington politics, all the stories they're breaking, that's extraordinary work. It's just extraordinary work. It's deep, it's well reported, it's factual. So, and you can compare it against, I actually have done this maybe to console myself that we can be as good as the people from before, taking out things that won the Pulitzer Prize from many years ago. Journalism today is actually in many ways better, and it's better because we have better tools available to us.
Wow. I feel better already.
Great. And this is one of the first times I heard someone from a major newspaper be that optimistic about the quality of our journalism, while being realistic about the actual real cutbacks that have happened. I mean, it's interesting, at Frontline, we've actually added fact checkers to our staff. So what we have found is that we needed it so desperately because increasingly our audience will catch all of our mistakes. I mean, this is the other thing, is there's a mad vulnerability now for the press in general that an error is very very vocal, very fast. So we're really all so cognizant of that. And with a big documentary film series, you can't so easily go in and say this is updated, right? Those are big seminal pieces of work, and they're not living and changing as it were. So it's interesting that as fact-checking is diminished, the vulnerability the press has. And I think the lack of trust is huge in us. So the more we can do to be factual and to be right, the more trust builds again. And we've seen this just across the country, how there's been a real, not so much here, but across the country, people concerned about the nature of the East Coast press, right? So we want to make sure that we're making sure that we reach more people than that.
But I mean, what do people trust today? I mean, I feel like we live in
They
such
trust
a
their
cynical
friends
age.
on Facebook, and I think if you look at the Pew Research, right? If you look at the Pew Research, which I think is significant, is that most millennials anyway, so younger people, are getting their news from Facebook. And we know that Facebook is a stew right now of factual journalism and non-factual journalism. And you have to be pretty sophisticated to distinguish between the two.
I can't say the number of times I'll say to somebody, well, where did you read that? Facebook.
Facebook,
well,
right.
Where did that come from? On Facebook. How did it get there? I don't know. It was just Facebook.
My friend
right?
sent it to me, and it's really interesting, and it's not
did it
true.
come from a source? Was it it's just an amorphous piece, yeah.
Good. I'm glad you brought us back down off the feeling good
Yeah,
part.
we're just
Right, sorry.
go straight.
journalists.
'Cause
Go straight
that
to
wasn't going to go
depressing.
with my theme.
Yeah.
So for you, Amy, it does seem like our news diet, and this maybe is related to Facebook, seems driven by ideological self-segregation, where people kind of go into camps and that's what they read. And maybe it's never before. So is this, maybe provocative here, is that necessarily a bad thing? Is it, or is it just more honest?
Right.
And one more thing,
Yeah.
if it is bad, can we do anything about it?
Right. So, so I think about this a lot, which is this idea that there was once a pure time when everybody agreed on the news, and that we went and we all watched Walter Cronkite or the Brinkley, and we could say, well, that's the news, and I trust it, and these are the most honest people, and we can all across all the different spectrums and ideologies agree on this. And then I say, well, okay, that obviously wasn't true because we didn't all agree. We have been a polarized country since we were founded, so that's not new. And I think back to what that era must have felt like, especially for some of the people in this audience sitting up on this stage right now, that our voices weren't included at all in that. It was 30 white dudes in rooms that were filled with a bunch of other white dudes up in New York, right? And that was the news, and they determined what the news was from their vantage point. And if you didn't fit into that nice little box, then your world was never shown to the rest of the world. Now, we know that everybody's point of view can get out in any way, which is fantastic. We've broken that model up in some ways. Now listen, there still is, when we talk about the East Coast media elite, there is still a great deal of, there are a lot of voices that aren't heard. And it's not just about race and gender, but it's pretty clear too, when we're talking about economic status, education status, that we're not getting that diversity of voice in there. But there are now more places to read about more perspectives and more, it's not just opinions, but you're getting different perspectives because you're bringing in so many different people into this realm. That is good. I think that's healthy, and I think the competition about it is really, really healthy and really, really good. And the idea of having a monopoly going back to that era seems super counterproductive. So that part's good. I do think, though, that we are comfortable with our own opinions. And we always have been. That's not new either, sort of self-segregating. I think what's different is that thanks to these things, we have become less likely to engage with other people than ever before. So you can just orient yourself to a diet of news, whether it's your Facebook feed that's curated and you're reading just people who agree with you. How many people here got in fights with people on their Facebook and decided to unfollow them or unfriend them or whatever, right? So you think you're in community and it's giving you a diverse point of view, but it's really not. It's just people who agree with your social, cultural, political, whatever points of view. If you do Twitter, it's in that same vein. And then there were a report too, I don't know if this was Pew or someone else who had looked at, even if you're both reading if you're reading the same paper, that folks on the left and folks on the right were choosing to read certain stories and choosing to skip other stories, right? So you can even be in the same paper, but I'm not gonna read that story because it doesn't really go into my sort of frame. And I'm gonna go and read this story that does. Listen, we are absolutely at a tipping point in this country on so many different, we're getting disrupted constantly. And so it should make perfect sense that this is one of those too. I don't know what's on the other side, whether this is the way it's always gonna be, but it's clear that we're muddling through this and something is gonna come up on the other end. But as we go through it, it's gonna be as messy and complicated as this.
I find myself I keep worrying as these last few months play out. It's like, how far are we going to go in terms of polarization? How ugly is it going to get? The coarsening of our political discourse has been so extraordinary over the past year and a half. And now that President Trump is in office, just the way things have played out the last few months, the absolute bloodlust on both sides to try to sort of annihilate the other one is extraordinary. And I took a small and sort of sad comfort this morning when there was a terrible shooting at the baseball field in Arlington, Virginia, and the president didn't tweet something blaming the Democrats for it. So I thought, well, okay, well, like at least for today, the line is drawn there. That we're not going to accuse each other of inciting violence or whatever. But I feel like you're right. We are at a tipping point. It's actually extremely difficult as journalists we've all been doing this for a while, to find some sort of precedent that you can sort of use as a frame to understand President Trump. We're kind of an ahistorical nation anyway, but it's not President Reagan, it's not the Clinton administration, it's not the Bushes. There's nothing to turn to. We sort of left the map, and we're out doing these extraordinary things, and everything. It feels so overheated right now. I feel like every story that comes out of the Capitol now, is this the one? Is this the big one? Is it Sessions' testimony that's going to be the tipping point, the game changer? Is it Comey's testimony? Is it the shooting this morning at the ball field? And we're all just like waiting with bated breath, or maybe we're hyperventilating, and it's very hard to be analytical after a while because you're kind of fearful for what's happening to the country.
I think that for Frontline, so we're not daily, so we do, and you're not either, right? So Spotlight is really looking into investigative stories. So one of the things that we've been trying to do on Frontline is choose stories that we know are going to be really important, and then we're telling you the backstory. So something like the Bannon film that we just did, we really talked about his life and his firm beliefs and his commitment to those beliefs. And then, like you said, we had to wait until the night of air before we locked it, because at that point they were already seeing fissures with Trump and Bannon. So we waited until the very moment that we aired, because we all said, listen, Bannon could be gone on that Tuesday, right? Right. I mean, this is the world we live in now, right? So Frontline has to be completely current. You couldn't have a Frontline film on, or the NewsHour, that didn't know that he had been let go or something big had happened. So the conversation with PBS is very different now. But what we're trying to do is create intelligence around the people who are now actually running our government. So a great example is Scott Pruitt. You know, we're doing a big biography of Scott Pruitt and the people who surround him, because we want you to know who the people are who now run the EPA, right? It's super important, but we're going to have to follow this until the very end. And the same thing is true with Russia. Yep. You know, as we're looking at these really big stories, that we're trying to choose ones that will be important so that you can try to understand what's happening right now, as much as we can, right? So we're doing our best in that way.
So this is to you, Raney, but you all might want to chime in too. Thinking about intentionally fake news, the stuff that was placed.
Yes.
It may not have determined the outcome of the November election, but I mean, I think there's a consensus that it had some kind of impact to be determined. Moving forward, thinking about that, because I think that's not going to stop, and we certainly have seen it in Europe. What are the dangers, especially from a journalist's point of view? What do you think of the efforts by social media companies to combat it?
That's a tough one. I'm going to start with the last part of your question because I think it's really interesting. I do think companies like Facebook and others are actually trying to grapple with this actively right now. How can they figure out a way to differentiate factual news from fake news, and is there going to be a categorization? So this is an active conversation that's happening between news editors like myself and people at the Globe and others, where we're in active conversation with Facebook right now about how they can differentiate, or are they willing to, right? Or instead, because they're not a news organization, are they going to actually let their community decide what's real and what's not? So we have been saying that we want and we hope for a dialogue with them so that we can do better. I think that a place like Google, on the other hand, is really interesting how companies are taking different approaches. Google, for example, their product Newsstand, if you guys have it, if you don't, you should get it on your laptop or your iPad. They actually curate themselves, and they have a small group of editorial people who follow news, and they follow actually editorial practice and news standards that we would follow very similarly to determine what is real and what's not, and what's a factual organization like the Boston Globe versus something that is coming from a dubious and fake source. So they are approaching it differently, but that's not to say it's the only way to approach it. And I do think places like Facebook had a lot of, they took a pause. They paused. They hired people like Campbell Brown and others to say, what are we going to do about this? I think it's incredibly dangerous. I think it's painful for us as journalists. I'll speak for my staff when we see things in our own film taken out of context, then put on Twitter, and you see how this can just go like wildfire, where you're trying to like ride that wave to correct it. And the only thing I can say is that we're very vigilant ourselves about our own facts so that we're not vulnerable to that. And then we are thinking actively about doing a big film called What Happened to the News? What do you guys think? Because we need to understand how this all happened, right? And where are we going with this? And also, what's the money behind the people who are really profiting from fake news? I think that's another great story for us all to actively report on.
Well, and the other thing to remember about a lot of the fake news, especially the stuff that showed up on Twitter, and in some cases on Google and Facebook, this is what the Russian hacking story really we should be spending a tremendous amount of attention on this. These are bots, right? These are not human beings spreading fake news. These are literally algorithms that are doing a lot of these things. So there is some really scary stuff out there about what, and again, in this case, what we know the Russians did, but we know that this is the kind of stuff that's going to continue to happen, and they're getting more sophisticated about the algorithm and how they're able to sort of put that into the stream of news. So that's a really difficult thing. The other piece, when I talk to some of the tech company folks, they're also in a bind, because I said, look, here's the deal. We have this First Amendment thing. We take that seriously. And it's up to lawmakers to choose what they want to do. They make the laws. We follow the laws, right? So if you guys are going to tell us that, well, we're going to have a new set of standards, right? There's going to be a new law about what you can and cannot post on any sort of media. That's fine, but you guys have to do that. That's not our job to be policing that. That's the job of legislators. So I think it's actually much more complicated than simply people spreading a rumor, right? This gets into some really, really complicated territory that is going to take a combination of government and the companies themselves and the news media. And ultimately, this goes back to this disruption. I mean, I really do believe that this is what it feels like to live in the 21st century right now, which is everything around you is being disrupted constantly. We're only just one entity. The news media is only one entity that's being disrupted. But think about everything else in your life that has changed or has been altered in some way, shape, or form over the last 20 years. And it's only going to continue. So I think the challenge, going back to your first question, Burt, was just how do you do it in an environment that is as polarized as we are now, where cooperation is sort of frowned upon, where compromise is considered a really dirty word. It makes it that much more of a challenge.
I just wanted to add just one thing about the fake news. The danger from fake news is not only like incrementally moving the needle to the left or the right or pushing you in the direction of chasing something that's false. It can also produce sudden and spectacularly bad outcomes. I mean, if you didn't follow it closely, the whole thing with the Qatari government, they said the Russians had hacked into their official news agency and posted news saying, had the leader of Qatar speaking favorably about Iran and saying that President Trump might not make it through his term and saying other things were sort of disparaging. All the other rivals in the region then ganged up against Qatar and put an embargo on them, blockaded them. President Trump jumped in and said, yeah, you guys have got to stop supporting terrorism. So the Russians say, of course, they didn't do it, but let's for a second assume it's true. They almost lit the spark of a war in the Middle East. We almost got a war in the Middle East just last week.
Right, really dangerous.
Right.
See, you are a downer. Thanks, God.
Yeah, things
I'm
are
so
terrible.
glad, you know. Gosh,
Nothing
now
says
you-
party like
now
journalism.
You just reassured me.
So this question is to Amy. Do you see evidence that the Trump administration's strategy of countering facts with its own set of facts, kind of the famous alternative facts, is being mimicked by other politicians? And do you think it's effective when it is?
Yeah, so I think it's important to put into context what's happening that's unique to Donald Trump and what has been happening before Donald Trump and what's going to happen after Donald Trump. The world that we are just discussing is going to continue regardless of whether Donald Trump was ever on the scene and where we'll be in 4 years or 8 years. But meaning that this has been happening. He is not the cause of it, but it is. So I think we have to understand and appreciate that. But how he operates in that environment is really important to understand. The other thing, in going back to Scott's point about trying to find some historical precedents, trying to use your position in politics, whether it's as president or in other high-ranking positions, to sort of manipulate and spin the facts or the news is not new either. And that's been going on for quite some time, and how we respond to that. So one thing that I found really interesting in one of the Pew studies was when they asked Americans, really going back, I guess it was going back to the Reagan era, they've asked this question about the importance of the media as sort of being an arbiter and being a watchdog, really. So the importance of the role of a watchdog in the media. And what you notice over the years is that when Democrats are in power, Republicans are more interested in seeing media having a more active role, and Democrats are less interested in the watchdog role. And when Republicans are in power, suddenly Democrats are much more interested in the watchdog role, and Republicans aren't as interested in the watchdog role. And what I found fascinating was that in this era, so we saw this during the Bush era, Democrats much more interested in seeing a watchdog role than Republicans. And when we get to Obama, right? Now, you still saw, even in Obama, Democrats still interested in a watchdog role. But what you're seeing now, the difference between the intensity among support for Democrats for watchdog is higher than we've ever seen. And while the support for Republicans for watchdog role is basically the same as it was during the Bush era. So what's changed is really who's more intense about it. But that the partisanship has always been a big driver of the role that you want to see the media playing. And so if your team is in the White House, then you think the press is being too hard on them. And if your team's not in, you think the press isn't being hard enough. And So I think that is always, that's been a part of the reality for quite some time. I think what's different now, as we all discussed, it's just how we're able to push it out through our social media, and how we as a country, we have to recognize too how polarized we've become as well. What the campaign really exposed in this country is we really, this divide between two Americas. We've always sort of had that conversation, but that it's no longer just a one or two-dimensional divide. We're divided now in terms of education and race and geography in ways that is different than we've seen before. And I think that's also getting caught in all of this.
So can I just add
Yeah,
a little
please.
bit? As we watch this extraordinary period unfold in front of us, I ask myself whether it's Donald Trump is part of something larger, or if there's very much a unique quality to Trump that cannot be replicated by other people. In order to do what he does, which is to repeat something that has been proven false 1,000 times over and insist the 1,001st time that it's true still, despite everything everybody else said, it takes an extraordinary narcissism or ego or something to be able to do it. To be the president of the United States is to get more criticism than any other person in the world. You'll be the most criticized person in the entire world. And for him to sort of continue to fight back, oftentimes with nobody else joining him, because he goes his own way, right? Even the people that want to follow him, they can't follow him because he's gone over here. It's like, it takes an extraordinary fortitude to carry on that way. I'm not sure that's a virtuous thing, but I'm not sure that other people can easily do it. I'm not sure that this style of politics of just, I'm going to completely define my own reality separate from the underlying facts. Can you think of anybody else who successfully does that?
So one word you didn't mention, Scott, was the word liar. And I want to ask you that, and this go for Raney too, is that I know some outlets have explicitly had an internal conversation not to use the word when confronted with the scenario you just described. So I'd like your take on that. I actually don't know what the Globe's position is on that.
I don't think we do it. I don't think we do it, and I actually think we almost never do it. And I've done investigative reporting for a long time, and even I can tell you I've talked to many people who are lying, and I'm pretty sure I never called them liars in what we wrote. We sort of said, here's what they said, here's the actual facts, draw your own conclusion. To me, calling somebody a liar is such an emotionally loaded term that you lose more than you gain from it. I do feel like a lot of the journalists that cover Trump regularly have sort of calibrated themselves so they're writing about some sort of boy king and hoping he had a good breakfast so that we won't get into a war today. And that tone comes through in their reporting, but they don't actually say he's a liar or that he's this or that. Maybe some do. Who's calling him a liar? They often will say it's untrue.
I think there have been outlets, but I'm not sure the big dailies, for example, have called him a liar. But I would say like kind of the next tier have embraced the term because of the reasons that you've described. They said, well, here's the facts. He keeps doing it, and there's intent, which seems to be the missing piece.
Chris Cuomo will often say he's stating a falsehood or something like that, but
Yeah.
they avoid the L word.
Right. So investigative reporters rely on, not exclusively, but often on secret sources, leaks, and lately it seems like there's a steady stream of both, and it's leading to some of the best journalism that we've seen. Why is that right now? And is there speaking as a journalist, is there a downside for our democracy in that? Any of you?
I think the reporting is showing that absolutely people are trying to get the word out, right? I think that this is a desperation in some ways, how much leaking is happening by internal sources and the
a desperation
level
on
at
people
which.
inside the White
I think
House?
they need to get their word out. And so I don't know if you feel this way, but I definitely have felt in the people who are leaking to us that they desperately need to get the word out. They feel it that strongly, and that ranges from the EPA to other sources. And I think that that's righteous if you can vet their what they're telling you. So where I think it gets a little dangerous in journalism, but we haven't really seen this with the Post or the Times or anything, their work has been amazing, is that when you're getting this information fed to you, how do you then vet it? And so in the past with Frontline, we often don't use confidential sources for that reason, because at the bottom line is, can you vet what they're actually telling you? And do you have another source, and do you have actually a third source, which is what we really hope for when we're breaking a big story. And so we tend to not use confidential sources for that reason unless we really have to. But I think in a daily, you know, they're covering it daily, then absolutely they're trusted sources at this point for them. I don't see a big danger in that.
Well, I mean, up to a point that's true. I mean, I would say for longer term stories, whether it's investigative or otherwise, you do prefer to have people speak with their names attached to it, because it allows the public to judge. Here's what they're saying, here's the person who said it. You can decide if they have an axe to grind or whatever. Whenever you go to the unnamed sources, whenever you go to that model, you've gone to one less level of disclosure to your readers. And you know what we try to do when we use unnamed sources is describe them in some fashion, I mean, and not just a person who knew stuff. It needs to be like a description so that you can at least know they were a school teacher, a disgruntled politician, a farmer, whatever they were. But unnamed sources do carry a risk because the public can't vet who you're talking about. And secondly, in a place like the Trump White House, where there are clearly about 4 different major factions, all at severe cross purposes, you don't know if you're getting a partial view or you're getting one anger from over here but not the truth from over here. You're getting this extraordinary welling up of a volcano, but are you getting a full picture of the whole explosion? I don't know.
You alluded to this earlier, with the kind of the sheer pace of revelations leading from the leaks and everything else, and the good work of journalists, is it changing expectations for the whole industry? I mean, if it's 5 o'clock and there's not something going over my feed, I'm like, hold on, where's the Post?
Right.
You know?
Screwed up.
No, I mean, I think for Frontline it definitely is. We have a whole digital team now that reports and works on a much tighter deadline. I think that it is that, but I also think the expectation, and I know the NewsHour has this too, is that you're up to date every single minute. So back to the point on Bannon, if you're going to be in the space of current affairs, which we are, then it's a much harder job. But it's also a lot of fun. A lot of us do have breaking news backgrounds. I came from the news before I went into documentary. Our managing editor was the same, and actually our special projects editor, Phil Bennett, who you guys know well, you know, he was in the dailies. So a lot of us have this gene, so we like that. I know that sounds crazy maybe, but we actually like it when something's happening that makes us really current and makes you feel that when you're watching Frontline, for example, that we're in the news, but we're going to tell you something much deeper. You know, that's really the promise that we always try to do, and I know you guys do too. You know, it's really trying to have a depth to the current affair. So we're not purely investigative in that way, but we try. And it's important, but I think it's changing all of us for sure.
And we were talking before we came up here. I think there's actually a crushing pace to the news today. And it always feels like it's each new thing is, you almost expect like an amazing revelation on a daily or an hourly basis at this point. And because it is so overheated and so fast-paced, many, many, many important subjects get shunted to the back. They do not get discussed. It's like all the oxygen in the room has gone to this gigantic power struggle in Washington. I mean, even like the terrible fire in London overnight, that's just an extraordinary event, but it only held the stage in America for about 2 hours, and then it was overtaken by something else. And it's just like that yesterday was Jeff Sessions, and the day before that was something else. And it's a staggering pace. And for those of us, like I'm not in Washington, I report on things here in Boston, and we're always thinking like, what day is safe to publish something? Because once you commit to publishing it, and then like something gigantic happens in Washington, it's like our boat has been swamped again. So you're just, the pace of events is so quick, it's hard to do that. It's hard to time it.
I don't know, we're finding our audience is so grateful when we do a non-Trump related film too. So I mean, we just got great feedback. We just had 7 films on in a row and 4 were related to politics, 3 were not. And the amount of mail and comments we got that, thank God you're looking at other parts of America. So I bet your readers are thinking that too.
Well, I think America's quite ready to talk about actual substantive things and how to solve problems. I think we've gone
ready,
10
yeah.
years without solving anything.
Yeah, I think so.
Amy, you got a comment?
Well, and that's what we would be talking about. I mean, we were talking about this earlier today about I sort of put myself in this place of pretending I'm on like Earth 1, and this is what's happening here. But what would be happening on Earth 2, right? If we had, we didn't have the leaks, we didn't have the tweeting, we didn't have the constant, whatever it seems to be coming out, what would we be talking about? And there is big stuff that's happening every day. We'd be talking about what's going on with the healthcare law from all different angles. We'd be talking about the legislative process that is or is not working and what's moving its way through there. So that also is getting big stuff that's affecting real people. And again, this is where I think it comes down to this, that this is the frustration and the cynicism that a lot of Americans have out there, which is when I talk about this disruptive change that's happening, right? You have a big section of the country that feels like they've been left behind economically, socially, culturally, and that their world is not being reported on, right? But what they are seeing a lot about is Russia or Sessions or Comey or fake news or whatever it is, and not anything that's relating to their day-to-day life. And so what happens to people when they feel like nobody's speaking to them, then they tune out even more, and then we get into more of those echo chambers. It becomes harder to reach them. They become more cynical and skeptical of it. And so then I think that makes it even harder for the real stuff to get through. I also think we're living in this time where, for all of the leaks and all of the reporting, what we still have is a really incomplete picture, right? And so what you're getting every time you read one of these stories is just a little blip. And you're trying to understand where that fits into the bigger, larger picture. And so what I feel like every day as I read the news, just as a consumer, is that I'm looking at this big screen and it's all one color. And every day we flip another tile on this screen and we get to see something. Maybe it's somebody's toe, maybe it's just a color, maybe it looks like, is that sky, is that water? You don't really know what it is, and you're trying to make sense of all these different pieces. And it's never gonna be as complete a picture as you want to see, so you have to fill in those blanks. And I think what's happening more and more is people are filling in those blanks with what they want to see. So on Russia, for example, there are a lot of different pieces there. We know a lot of stuff. Tonight's big breaking news is that the special investigator, Robert Mueller, now is apparently actively looking into Trump and what is the word that I'm looking for? Obstruction, thank you. That he had actively obstructed. Now, that is important. That's an important story. But where does that fit into this bigger picture? If you believe, and as a lot of people do, that this picture, when we reveal it, is of Trump cozying up to Putin, okay? That there's something nefarious there, right? The picture we're gonna be revealed is like Trump literally sitting on Putin's lap or something. Then every tile I flip, you say, well, see, that's Putin's knee right there. I'm telling you, that's his knee. Or that's Trump's head. I know it's part of I think that's Trump's ear. That's what's going on. If you believe that this is all a bunch of smoke and there's no there, you're like every piece underneath it all, you're gonna find it's gonna be a big joke, and it's gonna be like a hippo on roller skates, okay? And that there's nothing underneath all of this, and you guys are all making this up to give yourself the picture that you want to see. So that's where I think it's really hard, just thinking putting yourself in the perspective of a consumer who already feels detached from the world that's getting reported and feeling not heard. Or even if you are feeling heard, but you're not really getting this picture with every one of these leaks.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, panel. I would love to hear some questions from our audience. Do we have a couple mics, because this is recorded? Okay, one moment. Let's make sure we have the equipment. There we go. So if you are a questioner of our panel, make sure you have a mic and you speak into it, because you will not be recorded for posterity. I also ask that you ask a question, because as opposed to, I don't know, an essay. We've got about 15 or 20 minutes, and I want to make sure people have an opportunity to ask questions. This gentleman here with the mic,
Hello.
thank you.
Hi, this is for Ms. Walter. I'm a big fan. I think your work is great, and I think your comments this evening have been extremely insightful. I'm impressed.
Thank you.
I watched you the night of the election in November, and I never saw a newscaster's face turn so white as yours did when you realized that Donald Trump had been elected. My question is, what was going through your head then?
Yeah.
And how long did it take you to regain your composure?
Exactly. Thank you for that wonderful walk down memory lane. So 2 things, as you all, as PBS aficionados can appreciate, is that we don't have commercial breaks in PBS, right? So you're going for 8, 10 hours straight. So there are 2 problems with this. One, I cannot sit for 8 to 10 hours without having to get up and go to the bathroom, right? And especially because you're supposed to be hydrating and doing all this. So that was problem number 1. So you might have also seen that. The second one is you never have a chance to actually during the commercials be like, what is happening, right? Because we came in there with a very clear idea of where this was going to, not where it was going to go in terms of exactly what the outcome was going to be, but we saw what the trajectory was supposed to be. And this was literally everybody. There was a unanimity among the political class, Dem, Republican, insider, all of the folks about where it was going. And so as probably it was as close to about 8:30 when I was like, nope, this is not going the way that it looked like we thought it was going to go. And then I'm also trying to surreptitiously text to sources, right, without being seen on TV as doing this. And what it reminded me of was the 2004 election, because just like that, the exit polls that came out, just like the exit polls this time, suggested not just a big, not just Democratic win, but a big, right? There were the exit polls coming out that showed Kerry winning by a ridiculous number, which we didn't believe then because we knew it was really close. Here it was like, oh, well, that makes sense, right? But that proved to be not right. And it was like 2004, what I remember talking to Democrats about right before the election, they said, we're doing, or during that night was, oh, don't worry, we're doing great. We hit all of our targets, right? What they forgot was that the other side also had targets, and they exceeded their targets too. And so while the Clinton campaign kept texting in all the data that was coming in, oh, look how great we're doing in X county, Y county, early vote, nobody was paying attention to the fact that, oh, but the Trump campaign is doing that much better than anybody expected them to do. And so that was going through my mind. And the second thing really was, this is my job, and I got it wrong, right? So what happened? How did I miss this? Where is this? And so for me, it really was about how I've been doing this for 15 years, and now you sort of see your whole life flash before your eyes. I missed the biggest story in American politics, right? So what is it? What did we miss? So I instantly went into what that was, and so as I'm trying to do that, and then trying to think about how I'm going to write about this tomorrow. So that was essentially the evening for me. Now I feel really sweaty just thinking about all of that.
Do you have the mic here? Right. There's also some folks in the back, so after we ask some of yeah. So where's the first one? Right here, and then over there.
This is a question for Scott particularly about the 8,000 word story. And even in the 4,000 word story, more and more people are only reading their newspapers online. And I know the Globe has numbers on how short a time people are staying when they click on that story. So could you reflect on that a bit, and how do you structure your stories so that you get people not only to click there, but to stay there?
Those are very good questions, and those are actually what you're asking about is something we think about and worry about a lot. You'd be amazed when you go to any of these websites the number of metrics that they're keeping on you as you're reading. And one really simple one is, as you scroll down the page, they know where you are, and they know if you stop and you linger for a while. That's why sometimes something pops out at you and you stop your cursor for a little bit. Or if you scroll too fast, they suddenly put a promo up or something. Like you're being monitored. And people don't spend a lot of time. I actually hate to tell the world the amount of time people really spend reading the average news story, but it's under a minute. It's under a minute that the average person spends on a given story. And so when you see, like we have this data that we get constantly of how long are people spend on each story, when something gets above 2 minutes on a story, you say that's pretty good. You know, you get a little meme beside it that says, you know, this one's trending. You know, look at that. People are spending 2 minutes on that story. And for our stories, you know, we do keep them longer, but like the 8,000 word story, the average reader stayed for 8.5 minutes, which we considered like an eternity. For you know, in the news business, no other story was read for that long in the entire year. Now, obviously, in 8.5 minutes, unless you're a pretty fast reader, you probably didn't read the whole thing, but hopefully at least you got the flavor of it. And so what you see with all of the print-style journalism is you're seeing the text is being interrupted more and more. You know, you don't just read 1,000 straight words. You read 2 paragraphs, and there's a photo or a chart that jumps out at you. All these things are in the column, and they're all meant to sort of dazzle you in some fashion. And if you tell us what dazzles you, we'll do it more. So, but it's a big issue. It's like, how do you keep people engaged? And for us, you know, even though I talked before about writing longer stories, we're well aware that can't be where things are going. I mean, we have to actually lean harder on visuals and less on the words to tell our stories. Especially, you know, I pity the person that reads an 8,000 word article on their phone.
So here's the next one, and make sure that if we have a mic, there's a couple hands in the back. We'll make sure the mic gets back there too. You can be next, Jess.
So I recall in the French election there was some reporting about some fake news being put out, and people were encouraging citizens to not pass it on. And I'm thinking about some of the things that you said, Mr. Allen, about your thoughts about putting things out for the readers to consider. And I'm just wondering about that interplay between the responsibility of citizenry and the interplay with just your comments on what your views are on that aspect of.
Well, there were 2 really interesting things about that election. The first was that the Macron people knew that this stuff was coming out, and so they proactively told people, right? Like, stuff's going to leak about us, and a lot of it's not going to be true, and we're going to actually tell you the stuff, and you know, right? So they were proactively letting people know about that. The second are the rules around elections, that there is no campaigning for a certain number of hours before the polls, and so the news media literally did not run, right? The stories,
Really
which would never happen here. Like, let's just be really clear, that's never, ever going to happen. But it really was a very interesting strategy, though, to come right out and say, you know, look, I know that stuff has been hacked. It's clear because somebody, you know, we can see their digital footprint or whatever it is, or we've been alerted to this. So we're just going to let you know that. And there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff out there. And I want to let you know that there's stuff that may not be true, but you're going to have to, as a campaign, this is a whole different way of thinking, and I think we're going to see more and more of this, right? That campaigns are going to have entire strategies of how to deal with information that may not be fake, but if they can get into your email, then stuff that's going to be put out there is actually true. And then, of course, there was the debate here about should the news media have put the WikiLeaks out on, right? Should they have printed information that came from John Podesta's emails as part of, right? That was illegally obtained and leaked. What do you think?
Oh, I'm sorry, did you have a comment?
I'm sorry, but my answer is yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
like, we take all leakers, so if there are people in the audience that would like to leak us some information, I mean, generally speaking, it's the leaker that's in trouble for leaking documents, not the media organization that receives it. That doesn't mean that we should be irresponsible. We have every obligation to make sure that what we're about to publish is true and correct, but I don't have a moment of moral hesitation to receive purloined documents. We want them. That's it.
I'm glad that was clear, Scott. All right, back.
This question is for Raney, who has started this evening saying that she was very optimistic that somehow if she kept her head down and kept doing things the way she knew was best, that things would turn around. Is this just a reflection of you as an optimistic person, or what you're smoking? Or is there, in fact, a route out of these very dark woods that we're in that you can mention some of the signposts?
I love that question. And something that Amy mentioned earlier is that a lot of people felt like their stories weren't being told in the country. The reason for that is that a lot of journalists lost their jobs. Thousands upon thousands of editorial jobs were lost in our country. Mid-sized newspapers are gone. Small newspapers, we were talking about it earlier, right? So the optimism I feel is that I feel there's a new appreciation for serious journalism again. I can't tell you how many people have come to us at Frontline and said either they want to be involved or they support us, or this sort of positive force behind especially tough investigative journalism and fair journalism that's on the NewsHour and Frontline and the Globe and others. There's a new appreciation, and so we feel reinvigorated again. I was speaking in public for years about the dissolution of serious journalism across the country, and nobody was listening. You know, disruption hit us hard, right? Especially the newspaper industry. What happens when newspaper people lose their jobs is that television suffers, and I'll tell you why. So working in ABC News, every single morning what we would do is, as young people in our 20s in these big news meetings, is we would open up the newspapers from across the country and say, what's the news tonight, right? And that's where we found our news. So I felt like it was an important story to tell. I told it in News War, actually, for Frontline, and we still weren't really getting traction for this. So I feel like there's a new appreciation for our work. And I do feel the stronger we can be and the more we can be transparent, the better. And people are asking us for that. And that's why big investigative units are getting tons of funding, too. That's the other great news on our front.
Thank you. There's a question on the up and to my right.
Yes, I was wondering specifically, I know Amy and Scott, you both touched on this a little. There was an article recently in Vox about Trump the bullshitter versus Trump the liar, and basically was going into that he's trying to, or whether or not it's intentional, crowd out other stories, like for Comey. He doesn't necessarily believe that what he's saying, but was calling him a liar because then that's the big news story. Mm-hmm. How can we combat this approach that he's just kind of trying to crowd out everything else, or potentially crowd out everything else, and make sure that the important stories are getting told?
Well, I mean, I think it is clear that he does want as much news attention as he can possibly get, but I know there are people who see some grand design, that there's brilliant manipulation. It may also just be the manifestation of his personality, because a lot of the things that he does are clearly destructive to him and his followers, and not something that advances his agenda. It makes a lot of noise. It takes over the news cycle. But at the end of the day, he actually has nothing to show for it. And when I was in college, I had a professor who told me, don't assume there's a conspiracy if simple incompetence is a good enough explanation. and that may be what we're dealing with right here. And he's not steady state. I mean, if you look at the polling numbers, even among his core constituency, it's starting to go down. And if he's not able to actually have tangible achievements to give to his supporters, at some point, even the core supporters are going to begin to question him. So he may have the seeds of his own destruction in the way he's conducting himself.
I also think serious stuff is happening in Washington right now. Serious people are speaking, and I think that you're going to start to see this tilt a little. So even if you read the news today, this week, versus 2 months ago even, you'll see that they're starting with what's actually happening in reality, and then they're including what Trump did to respond. And so you're seeing this reversal start to happen in the narrative. Now, does this take hold? We don't know yet, right? Because we're only a few months into this. So we don't know what holds. But I do know if you read this closely, even the headlines are shifting towards reality. And then you find out what then happened on Twitter a few hours later in the middle of the night or whenever he decided to share his thoughts.
But I feel like cable is not helping that. Right. So cable is driving the other piece of it, right? And goes, I think, directly to your point about cutting back on, I don't know if it's cutting back on staff or it's cheaper, but it's clearly much more efficient and less expensive to have panels of people talking than to put a package together. Okay, package is
very expensive.
It's very expensive, and you got to travel to places, and you got to have production people putting it together, and you have to have really good, smart people who can write for that and do that consistently. It's a lot easier to get a bunch of people on a panel to debate Donald Trump's latest tweet. And so, unfortunately, I think that continues this cycle that you're pointing out. I mean, there was yesterday was really consumed by the tweet, or I can't even remember what he said. Now it's all like a big jumble, but of the Newsmax friend of his who came out and said he was thinking about firing Mueller, right? So it wasn't even his tweet, but it's that a guy who was in the White House talking to people got this impression or was told this, and then it became a story the next day, and then every member of Congress gets asked about it, and then it becomes part of this whole. And
that was originated on the NewsHour.
Yes,
as a
it was.
moment. But then cable
took it and made it right.
Into,
so that's what I think the challenge is how do you make that as a one story? Oh, okay. Robert Mueller.
That's what one
question.
person said.
That's
right?
what one person says. Also today, this happened, right? Versus, we're going to spend 2.5 hours on every angle of this. Could he do it? How does he do it? What does it mean if he does it? What do the Trump people say? What do the Clinton people say? What is it? And that perpetuates a lot of this. So the interesting piece is, cable news in terms of its overall viewership isn't huge.
We're bigger, actually,
Yes.
just to say that.
Thank you.
Frontline, we're bigger than cable.
Thank you.
I don't know. I think the NewsHour is now, too, so people are hungry for fair journalism. Just saying, more people watch us than that.
But that drives,
circus.
and it's interesting that this, maybe somebody does have this question about, hasn't been raised yet, but just like, what is the media, right? So we all get lumped into whatever that is and whatever your view of what the media is. So if your view of the media is talking head, screaming at people panels, then that's different from what these guys are doing.
What they think.
They're here at WGBH. But who is the media? I never know how to answer that question.
We have time for just a couple more questions. Where are our mic angels?
Okay.
Oh, one back there, yes. Thank you.
Hi. So I have a question about the next election. Over the past very, very long 5 months, I find myself looking towards the next election and who I'm hoping to see, and I hear about new or people that I haven't heard of in every day speaking out, and it's giving me a whole bunch of ideas. So I'm wondering, the question is for everybody, who are you hoping to see play a large role in the next election, and who are you hoping to be on the ballot?
Wait,
That's
playing a large role as a candidate, you're saying, or just as a
candidate,
institution, or a
or as an institution as
Are you
well.
talking 2018 or 2020?
2020.
Ah.
Yeah.
Because the next election is 2018.
That's an important
For people
election,
like
too.
Me,
For
I
Amy.
love midterms. That's my wheelhouse, people. That's House
Well, they happen
races,
to be
Senate
kinda
races, governor's
important, we
races.
found out.
They're very important.
But you're definitely seeing people are auditioning right now
Yeah.
to run for president, right? I mean, Seth Moulton in our own home state here, right? If Barack Obama can do it with 2 years as a senator, why not somebody 4 years as a U.S. representative?
Right.
I mean, the whole model of politics, and
That's right.
you pay your dues, you work
That's
your way
right.
up, and eventually the machinery rewards you with the
That's right.
candidacy. Kick that out the door.
That's
I mean,
right.
Hillary Clinton is that's it. Not do that. We're not going to do that anymore. I mean, look at Macron over in France. I mean, he didn't have a party. He barely had anything, and he took over every piece of power in the entire nation. So it's all changed and broken. So you can watch right now the people going after President Trump. Those people, a lot of them are trying it out, seeing could I be the guy in 2000 or gal in 2020. But I have to admit, I have a hard time seeing beyond next week, let alone like all the way out to 2020. It just feels like
We're really
we're
thinking
being
about
buffeted here.
Russia.
Just one piece to leave you with. I told this story to Burt and folks earlier today. Before the 2016 election, there was this Democratic opposition research group that sent to all journalists their big opposition file on all potential 2016 Republican candidates. I think this came out at the end of 2014. And it was like this thick. And guess who was not in there? Okay? So Donald Trump wasn't even listed. There wasn't even a picture of him. Nothing. But there was every other candidate. Nobody in 2004 thought Barack Obama, well, it was a great speech that he gave at the convention that he was going to be the nominee 4 years later.
That's a great point, right? We don't know.
We do not know. So my advice is not about political advice, who I want to see or don't want to see. I think for the Democratic Party, what would be better for them is to not force a process, right? To let it happen. And you're going to see, I think Scott's exactly right, there are going to be 30 people who try to get themselves in the mix.
Well, I want to thank everybody. We've run out of time. I'm sorry, we've run out of time. You've been a great audience. This has been a great panel.
The weaknesses, the defects in our political culture and our civic culture are pretty fundamental, long predated he who shall not be named, and unfortunately will last for a very long time, whether he's a one-term, two-term, or, hopefully less than one term president. But we just have to start at the base, strengthening the political culture and civic culture, and that means just doing something.